For what, the last 40 years, investing was pretty simple, right? You just bought some stocks, some bonds, and you were basically good to go. Well, that era, it's over. Something really deep has shifted in the global system, and that old playbook for your money, it's not just old, it's actually become dangerous. So let's get into what's really happening.
That's a quote from Warren Pies at 314 Research, and he's pointing to something huge. You know the 60-40 portfolio, right? 60% stocks, 40% bonds. It's been the foundation of retirement planning for generations. The whole idea was super simple. When stocks zig, bonds zag. You're protected. But like he says, since 2020, that whole proposition has started to fall apart.
And man, 2022 was just a brutal wake-up call. It showed everyone exactly why those old rules are broken. That one thing you could always count on. Diversification, it just failed spectacularly. Both stocks and bonds went down together. There was absolutely nowhere to hide. And look, this wasn't just a bad year. No, this was a signal that the entire machine, the fundamental mechanics of the market, have changed.
So first, we've got to understand that what we're seeing is truly the end of an era, a regime that lasted for decades and defined how we all thought about investing. And at the absolute core of this massive change is a system that is under an incredible, unprecedented amount of stress.
Okay, just look at this number. This really shows you the sheer scale of the problem we're talking about. The historian Russell Napier points out that total U.S. debt is now over 380% of GDP. I mean, just to put that into perspective for you, that is higher than the debt we had after fighting 2 world wars. The entire system is more leveraged right now than at any other point in recorded history. Think about that.
And listen, this isn't just a U.S. problem, not at all. It's a crisis across the entire developed world. You've got major economies like China and France buried under these huge debt loads too. And this starts to create these really deep cracks in the system, like the tension you see in Europe between a country like France, which desperately needs to inflate its debt away, and a much more conservative Germany.
So here's the kicker. The kind of stuff we're seeing, the dollar going down, stocks going down, bonds going down, all at the same time, macro analyst Darius Dale points out that this is classic emerging market crisis behavior. This is what you expect to see in a small, fragile, developing economy, not the world's superpower. It's a massive red flag that the system itself has become dangerously unstable.
So it's not just about the numbers on a page. It's about what they mean. And what this mountain of debt means is that the whole financial system has basically lost its shock absorbers. It's fragile, it's brittle, and it's incredibly vulnerable to the second huge force that's changing everything, which is a total breakdown in geopolitics.
Which brings us right to our next point, a world that's dividing. Because all this economic stress, it's happening at the exact same time our global political order is just fracturing.
You know, for the last few decades, we've all been living in what Russell Napier brilliantly calls the non-system. And here's what that was. Starting back in 1994, China basically locked its currency to the US dollar. And that one move, it kept global inflation super low. It kept interest rates down, and it poured rocket fuel on the era of globalization. That's what made pretty much all the assets in your 401k just go up, up, and up for years.
So what happens when that whole system breaks? And that's really the critical question for all of us, isn't it? Because it's not just breaking down on its own, it's being actively torn apart. And we are all living through the fallout of that right now.
And Grant Williams really puts this into perspective. He says what we're seeing is enormous. It's a once-in-a-100-year kind of change. And here's the key part. He says the process of changing, of tearing down those old institutions we all counted on, well, that change has to be destructive. And you can literally see it on a timeline. This wasn't one event. It was a series of escalating crises that just systematically dismantled the old world. You know, 2008 showed us the cracks. 2020, the pandemic, it completely shattered global supply chains. And since 2022, all the geopolitical conflict has just slammed the accelerator pedal on this whole great unraveling.
Okay, so if the old rules are broken, what are the new ones? Well, the answer isn't some new fancy theory. It's actually a playbook that governments have used over and over again throughout history whenever they get trapped by this much debt.
And this is the key concept you absolutely have to understand.
It's called financial repression. And no, this isn't some conspiracy theory. It's a well-documented historical playbook. It's what governments do. After huge crises like World War II, when they have these insane debt levels, they intentionally hold interest rates way below the rate of inflation. Why? To slowly, quietly, and very effectively erase the real value of all that debt they owe.
So here's how it actually works, step by step. First, you've got a government with a mountain of debt it has to fund. Second, they force interest rates to stay artificially low. A lot of times they do this by making sure big institutions, like your pension fund, have to buy their government bonds. Then, third, they let inflation run hotter than those low interest rates. And what's the final result? Well, the real value of your savings and the real value of those bonds, it just gets slowly destroyed year after year.
And this all leads to a pretty shocking conclusion. In this new world, in a world of financial repression, the safest asset you are always told to own, the government bond, it becomes, in Russell Napier's absolutely brilliant phrase, a certificate of confiscation. Just let that sink in. That one idea flips decades of financial advice completely upside down.
And here's the trap that this sets for every single person trying to save money. Let's say inflation is running at 5%, right? But the interest rate you're earning on your savings or your bond is only 3%. Well, that means you are guaranteed to lose 2% of your purchasing power every single year. You are actively getting poorer in real terms. And that's not an accident. That is the entire point of the policy.
So, if this is the new game we're all forced to play, how on earth do you survive it? How do you navigate this shift? It all starts with changing how you think.
This right here, this is probably the most important mental shift you can make. And experts like Grant Williams talk about this all the time. The game isn't about return on capital anymore. It's not about asking, how much money can I make? In an era like this, a destructive era, the main goal becomes return of capital. The question changes to, how do I just make sure I don't lose what I already have? It's about wealth preservation, not just growth.
Okay, so what does that actually look like in practice? Well, the word that keeps coming up is resilience. It means you start questioning things you took for granted, like long-term government bonds. It means you start considering hard assets, gold, commodities, things that a government can't just print more of. It means prioritizing stocks in the real economy, industrials, manufacturing, companies that actually build stuff. And it means looking for value in places outside of the US, like Japan, the UK, or emerging markets. Basically, you're focusing on anything that can't just be inflated away.
But look, we have to be honest here and add a big dose of humility. Because veteran investor Bill Fleckenstein, a guy who's seen it all, he basically admits that this whole environment is just incredibly difficult. He says it's in his too hard pile and that he's personally carrying a whole lot of cash. And that tells you something really important. Even the pros think this is tough, and they're putting caution and just preserving their capital above everything else.
And I want to leave you with this one final, really provocative thought, again from Grant Williams. He asks, are you watching the right indicators? Because in this new era, the signals that are going to scream, get out or watch out, they might not be financial at all. They could be political, social, geopolitical. The biggest risk we all face is staring at the old financial smoke alarms when the fire itself, its very nature, has completely changed. So the question for you is, are you watching the right things?